Early on the morning of July 31st, a massive fire tore through a warehouse belonging to DNS, one of Russia's largest retailers of electronics and household appliances in the city of Vladivostok. The blaze broke out in a logistics building on Dniprovskaya Street, in an industrial stretch of the city, and within hours it had grown from what was first reported as a fire covering roughly 1,000 square meters into an inferno spanning about 5,000 square meters. That is a five-fold increase in a matter of hours, and it tells you almost everything you need to know about how fast this fire moved and how difficult it was to bring under control. Emergency crews from Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations arrived quickly, but the sheer scale of the building worked against them from the start. Firefighters managed to contain the perimeter of the blaze, stopping it from spreading further into neighboring structures. But containment is not the same as extinguishing a fire, and by the time crews had the flames boxed in, the damage to the warehouse itself was already done. Part of the roof collapsed under the weight of the fire and the structural stress of the heat. The rest of the roof did not fare much better. Reports from the scene describe the entire roof as having burned through completely, while sections of the building's exterior cladding melted from the intensity of the heat. When metal cladding on an industrial building starts to melt, it is a signal of just how extreme the temperatures inside that structure became. The response effort escalated steadily as the morning wore on. Initially, 22 firefighters and 7 pieces of equipment were dispatched to the scene. That was quickly deemed insufficient, given the size of the blaze, and reinforcements were called in. By the time crews had the upper hand on containment, more than 40 personnel and 10 units of firefighting equipment were actively working the fire. Police were also present at the scene, both to manage the area around the warehouse and, presumably, to begin the process of understanding exactly what happened. 2 factors made an already difficult firefighting operation even harder. The first was wind. Strong winds swept through the area during the firefighting effort, which is one of the worst conditions imaginable when you are trying to control a large industrial fire, since wind feeds oxygen to flames and can carry embers and heat to new sections of a structure, or even to nearby buildings. The second factor, and arguably the more troubling one, was a discovery made by fire crews once they arrived. Nearby fire hydrants did not have adequate water pressure. In other words, at the exact moment when firefighters needed maximum water flow to knock down a fire of this scale, the infrastructure meant to supply that water was not up to the task. Investigators have also flagged other fire safety violations connected to the site, though full details on what those violations entailed have not yet been made public. This combination, powerful wind pushing the fire forward and inadequate water pressure holding firefighters back, goes a long way toward explaining why a blaze that started around 1,000 square meters ballooned to 5 times that size before crews could truly get ahead of it. As of the latest updates, there have been no reports of injuries or casualties, which company leadership and emergency officials alike have described as the one clearly positive outcome from an otherwise devastating morning. Given the scale of the destruction, the absence of casualties is not a small detail. It suggests either that the building was unoccupied or lightly staffed at the time the fire broke out, or that evacuation procedures worked as intended. Dmitry Alexeyev, the co-owner and director of DNS Group, addressed the incident directly, speaking with Russian media including the TASS news agency. He confirmed that the warehouse held stock of household appliances and electronics, consistent with DNS's core retail business. Alexeyev was candid about the scale of the loss, indicating that the warehouse and everything stored inside it would likely be destroyed entirely, and describing the fire as one that had simply grown beyond the point where it could be extinguished in any meaningful sense. He noted that it was still too early to put a number on the financial damage, but he did not shy away from the reality that the losses would be significant. At the same time, he struck a tone of resilience, essentially telling reporters that the company would move forward despite the setback, and emphasizing that the lack of any injuries was, in his words, the one piece of good news to come out of the situation. It's worth taking a moment to understand what DNS actually is, because the scale of this loss only makes sense in context. DNS was founded in 1998, right there in Vladivostok, by Dmitry Alexeyev, together with his business partner Yuri Karakin. Over the better part of 3 decades, the company grew from a regional electronics seller into one of the largest retailers of computers, electronics, and household appliances anywhere in Russia, with an extensive network of stores and warehouses spread across the country. Alexeyev himself has built substantial personal wealth alongside the company's growth, with his fortune estimated in the billions of dollars according to major wealth rankings. A company of this size does not operate out of a single warehouse, which is part of why DNS was able to respond to this fire with some operational agility. In the immediate aftermath, the company announced that it was redistributing deliveries across its other warehouse facilities to minimize disruption to customers, and it warned that some orders in the Vladivostok area would face delays. Customers with pending pickups were redirected to an alternate retail location in the city while the situation at the burned facility was assessed. Now, here's where the story takes on a broader significance beyond just one company's bad day. This fire did not happen in isolation. It occurred against a backdrop of a string of incidents affecting logistics and warehouse infrastructure across Russia in recent weeks. In particular, distribution centers belonging to Wildberries, one of Russia's largest e-commerce marketplaces, have reportedly come under a series of attacks in recent weeks, with roughly 18 facilities affected and an estimated 1 million square meters of warehouse space taken out of commission as a result. That is an enormous amount of logistics capacity to lose in a short window of time, and it has understandably raised questions any time a similarly large commercial facility goes up in flames. Given that pattern, it would be reasonable for anyone following the news to wonder whether the DNS warehouse fire fits into that same story of deliberate attacks on Russian logistics infrastructure. On that specific question, Alexeyev himself has weighed in, and notably, he has downplayed that possibility. He indicated that, at this stage, the theory of external interference or a deliberate attack causing this particular fire appears unlikely. Investigators are still working to determine the official cause, and that determination will presumably take some time given the scale of destruction at the site. But the initial read from the company's own leadership points away from the kind of coordinated strike that has affected other Russian logistics hubs recently. Still, even if this particular fire turns out to have a more mundane explanation, whether that is an electrical fault, some other accidental ignition source, or something else entirely, the fire safety violations uncovered at the site during the emergency response are worth sitting with for a moment. Right? A warehouse holding thousands of square meters of electronics and household appliances is, by definition, full of flammable materials, packaging, and often lithium battery-containing devices that can complicate a fire once it takes hold. When investigators find that nearby hydrants lack adequate pressure and that other safety violations existed at a facility of this scale, it raises legitimate questions about oversight and infrastructure readiness, independent of whatever ultimately caused the ignition. Industrial fires of this magnitude tend to expose these kinds of gaps precisely because they push emergency response systems to their absolute limit, and this fire appears to have done exactly that. For DNS as a business, the practical fallout will likely unfold over the coming weeks. The company will need to conduct a full damage assessment, work through insurance processes if coverage applies, rebuild or replace lost inventory, and manage customer expectations around delivery delays in the region while its logistics network compensates for the loss of this facility. Given the company's scale and the fact that it operates numerous warehouses nationally, it is reasonably well positioned to absorb this disruption operationally, even though the financial hit to this specific facility appears to be near total. Alexeyev's own comments capture that balance well, an acknowledgement that the physical loss is close to complete, paired with a clear signal that the business intends to continue operating without major long-term disruption. For now, the situation in Vladivostok remains one where firefighters have contained the perimeter of the blaze, but continue working to fully extinguish it. Investigators are working to pin down an official cause, and DNS is shifting into recovery mode, rerouting deliveries and reassuring customers even as the full scope of the financial damage remains unknown.